Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Like to welcome you to the second panel for the day. We have a very knowledgeable panel here with us, comprising of people who have significant experience in the healthcare sector, both in terms of running companies in the space, advising companies in the space, and investing in the space. I think our agenda for today is really to look at consolidation and diversification within the healthcare services industry. And to me, this is a very exciting topic because this topic gives you an insight into what's really happening in the industry. Why are people doing the things they are doing? Why is somebody going and trying to acquire somebody else or trying to get into another adjacent line of business? And we hopefully will try and bring out those insights during the discussion. So the first aspect which we'll pick up is really consolidation. And we've seen a certain bit of consolidation happening in the industry. There's been a role which has been played by private equity players as well. But we will try and get in what are some of the drivers for these various stakeholders driving consolidation. We'll also talk about what's been the history, what's been the experience, what are the challenges that people have faced. And finally, hopefully give you a flavor of if you're a smaller player looking to get acquired or get consolidated in the industry, what should you be looking to do? So first up, I'd go straight to Sanjeev, who's been involved in M&A at Fortis, the Walkard acquisition and then SRL. Sanjeev, does consolidation work in the healthcare industry and what's the experience been?
I think it's yes and no both. And it depends on what stage of evolution you are as an organization. I remember earlier days when I joined Fortis when we had barely 3 or 4 hospitals. And we were, as a strategy, we wanted to consolidate. We wanted to have operations across the length and breadth of the country. And for us, it really made sense to go whole hog and look for assets. I remember we went south, we went west, and we used to look at standalone hospitals. Because that point in time, there were not many chains which were available to us. And we did our best to kind of look at creating a network which is accretive in every sense of the word. Now, when I say, accretive, first of all, what is it that you want to do with the network? And what are the benefits of having a network? To my mind, it's not just the people who are running the show. It's not just about the patients who are coming there. It's also about the kind of treatment you are giving to them. And it's only possible if you've got the right kind of systems and SOPs and everything. Now, for having that, for having a justification to have those systems in place, because you have invested heavily into it, you need to have a network. Your cost is already sunk to whatever extent it has. So you need to really have, robust systems around that. So we went about, doing small acquisitions to begin with, had the geographical presence, and by, people also learn about the brand. And once you've created a brand, everything falls in place. People have that trust because you have already, been to your system. They have seen what kind of work is being done, what kind of, results are, their outcomes are there. And eventually, we obviously did this Walkard, acquisition, which was the largest, which happened about 6.5, 7 years back, and by virtue of which we became one of the largest players in the country. So consolidation is something, depending on what stage of evolution you are in. It could be a strategy, or it could be a tactical thing, opportunistic thing where you feel, oh, I need to be in this particular geography and let me just pick that asset. But for beginners, I think if you are having the prowess to generate the funds or to make the investments, I think it could be a strategy as well.
So a quick follow-on on that. I mean, would you say acquiring single hospitals versus acquiring a larger chain, which would you prefer? Would you go acquire 10 small hospitals in 10 different locations or get a chain?
So Siddharth, I think the effort required to buy a chain vis-a-vis a standalone hospital is not too different. I know because I'm part of all those diligence, due diligences which we carried out. Just that it becomes a little more complex because you have to go to multiple locations. But by and large, I have seen the efforts are almost similar. You have to have the right kind of teams to be doing the due diligence. Uh, what I've seen is that, healthcare is a sensitive subject. And where I deliberately am using the word sensitive because you are dealing with the human lives. You have to have certain ethos, certain philosophy when you are getting into this business. So when you're acquiring a chain, I think my problem is not as much about acquiring a particular system or asset as it is about doing the post-merger integration, making it run. I've seen companies falling flat, in attempt to doing so. I think that's the trick, and I can dwell on that a bit later. What are the challenges which you really face, and why it cannot be a strategy? Because you may want to acquire each and every asset which is available in the, in the country or even beyond that. But is that the right strategy for you? Could it really work well? Is something to be seen. And you have to have the right kind of levers to be pulled. You have to have the right kind of thought process. What it will entail? Is it going to give you some kind of a cross-learning, or is it that you have a certain robust system which you want to implement across the board and get the benefit of that? So there are multiple things which goes into consolidation.
Thanks for that. So, the takeaway is be sure what you want to get out of it when you're getting into it. And I guess for people who want to get it acquired, they should also have a clear view on what the buyer is going to get out of it and what they are going to get out of it. And I think that alignment is important. Let me switch gears and go to Mr. Jalan. We were having this discussion on where consolidation makes sense, and you talked a little bit about single specialty. Can you talk about your thoughts on consolidation there and what should be driving it?
So I think I'm I'm not going to dwell on the large multi-speciality hospital. Let's talk about single specialty. And I remember when I was in Apollo Hospital, one had conceptualized this whole cradle piece as a very happy place and a very capable place to deliver babies. And those days, the value proposition was that if you want to deliver a baby, why go to a sick place, in a manner of speaking, which is intimidating, which doesn't make you feel good, etc., etc. And I remember seeing in fact, it was such a big surprise when I was told that nobody would come and deliver the cradle because they don't know the gynec. And even in the first year, I think 12 or 13% of the people who delivered in GK2 Delhi were people from Gurgaon, for that matter. So they didn't know the gynec. But there was a very clear value proposition. People would come and see the place and fall in love with it. Now, what has happened over the years, it has become a cut, copy, paste kind of a thing. So you like I said, good lobby, nice name, pink colors, LDR suites, and there is no differentiation they have with each other, for that matter. So it has become a category in itself. It has become extremely commoditized. And to that extent, given that scenario now, and plus, the likes of Cloud9 getting funded, and the investing community, some of them feel it's too late. And so all that happening is consolidation inevitable? I think it is inevitable. I mean, is it the best thing to do? I think at least like I said, it saves on marketing costs, it saves on other things. So I think if you're talking about single specialty hospital, the same story is not very different for IK, for that matter. I mean, I remember at Medium, after having created Cradle and Cloud9's the world, we actually created a property called the Birthplace, the brand called the Birthplace. And my one-line proposition was to the promoter that, Tarun, we are going to create an Emirates first class in delivery. And I think it is the most expensive place in town. So to deliver a baby, you're talking about in the suite 3 lakhs rupees. And it's doing extremely well. And the point being that even within that category, you created a differentiator, that we are not within quotes. I mean, poor man's birthplace is Cradle, for argument's sake. So I think there is scope to differentiate. People have to differentiate. You can't keep on just simply copying and assuming that, more location, more outlet is a solution. So I think single space consolidation is happening and is going to happen even more.
Thank you. I think for our entrepreneurs here, the message is clear. If you are not differentiating in a space, I think consolidation might be a good option for you. So let's move to the investors. What is your sense on this whole consolidation play. Let's say an entrepreneur came to you who has an existing asset in a particular region and says, hey, I'm going to consolidate, buy out hospitals, back me, fund me, and we'll build a great business.
So I think it will not be a natural yes or no answer, clearly. It's obviously everything is dependent on case by case basis. But typically this industry is pretty amenable to consolidation. I think there have been 2-3 drivers of consolidation over the last 5-7 years. Historically, if you were to map out, I think there were the large Indian groups. Yeah, Sanjeev mentioned Fortis, Apollo, who are obviously the large organized guys on the corporate hospital side. They were looking to add territories and geographies where they were not present in. Number two wave was some of the MNCs, which is the guys out of either Southeast Asia or even South Africa or emerging world largely, who came and now wanted exposure to India. I think that clearly has been one of the set of buyers out there. I think lately private equity has obviously seen this opportunity, and they are now trying to come in and come up with a platform strategy. So from a timing viewpoint, I think it's fairly opportune moment at this point to build out something. The challenges continue to remain. I think there are more buyers, right? So therefore, which has driven selling prices, I think, a little bit towards a discomforting level. And private equity funds, how they think, and I think a couple of people are smiling out here. So naturally, after a 4, 5, 6 year journey with a company, they've taken it from point X to point Y. There comes a moment where you have to figure out what's the next game in town, and an exit. And that point, a strategic exit is a possibility clearly out there. So I think that's would be my sort of broad reaction to this.
Thanks. I think Raghav has mentioned something which is not talked about very often in our industry is, if you have a private equity investor and you're not getting him an exit, consolidation often becomes something which you have to really consider very seriously. And sometimes people have had 2-3 rounds of private equity investors and not able to scale up. And then clearly the exit becomes a kind of a strategic sale or consolidation. And so, that's something which entrepreneurs should keep in mind. So moving on to Shantanu from General Atlantic, I think you guys have been investors in sort of the haloed brand, the first brand in the country, Apollo. And Apollo has not done too many acquisitions, though I believe they have evaluated. What's been the thinking there?
First of all, just to clarify, Siddharth, I was part of the Apollo team which did the investment from Apex, although now I'm at GA, but that's right, the experience was at Apollo. But let me share my thoughts on consolidation. I think if we go through the various subsectors, for the large multi-specialty hospitals, when they look at acquiring other multi-specialty hospitals, be it single or chains, there are really two things that they really evaluate today. They clearly themselves have a marketing engine, they have their own brand. So in terms of what they're looking for, one, they're looking for, are the locations strategic? Because like any other business, we know that there are catchments, there are strategic locations within catchments, and if you can get access to that catchment through a nice setup, it saves you a lot of hard work of establishing a new project, coming and creating more doctor competition, and hence seeing MGs rise up in that area. So it makes far more sense to consolidate that location than to create a new asset and divide the profit pool. On that, I think the last interesting acquisition I heard of is the one that Sanjeev was involved in, wherein Wockhardt had some very interesting locations, and Fortis saw good value in those locations, and a lot of them actually turned out to be as promising as it was thought they would be. Ever since, very clearly these location strategies makes most sense in the top 4, top 5 cities, because that's where the build versus buy economics and the difference between the two ROIs really comes up. The second thing that large multi-specialty chains look for is, am I acquiring a very, very specialized doctor team in a particular practice area which has a lot of market share in that particular catchment or even the extended catchment of that city or the neighboring cities. And so far, if I tell you the most prevalent consolidation strategy is not acquiring companies, but acquiring doctor teams. So today, the most prevalent consolidation strategy is to approach the gastro team, the neuro team, the cardio team in various other competitors and offer them a package which will, so that's another mode of consolidation. It's not necessarily traditional M&A, but that's the most prevalent strategy that people with lower cost of capital who are building out new beds are using because they quickly want to get their hospitals up to speed. They want patient flow to come in. And one of the easier routes to do it is to build a great competitive advantage in 2 or 3 practice areas, you know, cardio, neuro, gastro, and you just get a team and it's much easier. Again, since the Walcott acquisition, not a great location based M&A so far, but this doctor acquisition is becoming the key mode of consolidation these days.
No, I think it's fascinating that you've hit the nail on the head, that it's about doctor consolidation that's really driving the industry. Though, I would ask you another question. You know, from an Apollo perspective, consolidation, when you looked at, you know, various opportunities, it was really location driven because of the kind of player Apollo is, very significant. If you were to look at it from the perspective of, say, a regional chain, would the answer be slightly different?
Yes, absolutely. I think the regional chain, from a position standpoint, obviously doesn't have a lot of capital, lower cost of capital advantage. So for them, when they evaluate another regional consolidation in their core catchment, that where they are famous or where they have the right doctor connect, it's then really about whatever they are acquiring. I think mostly it's about people, the additional set of doctors who will join the team, and can you get that cultural alignment? If you were very clinical, practice focused, and you want a very outcomes focused, is the other company that you're acquiring, is the culture again very clinical, or is it far more sales driven or far more, you know, getting more inpatient driven? So I think for smaller chains, and I would say that for single specialty also, because a lot of single specialty chains in ophthalmology and women and child are now going and doing roll-ups of these single nursing homes or, you know, 2 or 3 nursing homes. I think most of them, unfortunately, the examples I've looked at, be it in IVF, be it in women and child, be it in ophthalmology, have been failures. So out of all, at least 10 such roll-ups, I've seen 8 fail. And the reason really has been the cultural mismatch. Because when you acquire something as small as that, you're acquiring a doctor or a set of doctors, and very quickly the alignment of objectives of that doctor and your chain don't seem to match, and because of which, you know, issues come up. So I think it's more tricky. It's far more tricky when you're acquiring 1 or 2 doctors, which is mostly the case in these regional M&A stories. Yeah.
This sort of ties up with what Sanjeev was also saying. There is a certain time and effort involved, and so if the size of the acquisition is small and you're talking about these roll-ups, sometimes the effort involved is just too much for the ticket size.
So just to add one thing, Siddharth, see, there are 2 perspectives when you're talking about consolidation. One perspective comes from the buyer, another one from the seller. From buyer's perspective, by and large, they're clear as to what they want to do. I remember I created this model in Fortis when we started our acquisition spree, what we used to call it as FLPP model. What kind of facility you want to build, what should be the location, what are the people you're looking at putting there, depending on the specialties, and P was for pricing, what kind of pricing you're going to get. So basis this model, we used to, you know, approach, the target. In SRL, it's a different story, because SRL, we were, when we acquired Piramal Diagnostics, we were largely north and west centric. We wanted a stronghold in east and south, and that's where we went about, acquiring Piramal Diagnostics, which created a furore. That time it was a 650 crore acquisition. But coming from the sellers, what I have seen is rather interesting, and with all humility I say I've met up with some wonderful people across the country. Between me and my team, I would have seen 80% hospitals personally, and with my team in the larger cities. So there's a clear distinction between creating a value and a valuation. So what used to happen was I used to see people, they would have one well-oiled machinery in the form of a good hospital which is running. Now you would take a few properties on lease here and there, showcase it as a network and ask for a valuation. Now people would take the bait, people may not take the bait. So it's rather stark, but this used to happen often. Just a thought I thought I must share with you.
No, a fair point. The valuation plays a role in some of these roll-ups and network managed models. I think the story on consolidation is really, it sometimes makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. There's a scale element to it because there's a lot of effort involved. What you do after it is also very important. It makes sense if you're not differentiated to look at a consolidation option. And I think finally, it has to tie in with your own strategy as a company on whether you want to access a new location. You talked about what kind of people you want, what kind of pricing you want. And that's been our experience as well in both Aster DM and Manipal. Wherever you've had a very clear intent on what exactly you want, there's been success. And where it's more general, we can add value, or our brand name is so great, we'll go there and we'll just conquer the market. Those have not been so successful. Let's move on to the whole question of diversification. And here, we are really talking about diversification within the healthcare industry, and we are talking about extending your core capability. So there's something which you do really well, and you want to extend that to some adjacent area. That's what we are going to talk about. And here I'll sort of start off with the investors first. Raghav, when you look at investment options, and there is somebody who's looking to say, hey, I do this, and I'm going to grow this, but the big opportunity, there's a lot of adjacent diversification areas. I want to get into home health, I want to get into diagnostics, health checks. How do you look at it? Does that seem like a viable strategy to you?
So I think on an overall level, I would say yes. In terms of expansion into adjacencies, typically makes sense if your sort of core strength can be leveraged in that opportunity. So just to take Apollo's example, which you've talked about, I think for the longest of time, practically they were resisting anything outside the large box model, which is a large multi-speciality, 250 bed, 300 bed, 500 bed hospital. I think over the last couple of years, 3 years, they finally figured out. Obviously, Cradle was a long sort of thing they started out, but lost the game on that. I think trying to resurrect that as more and more opportunities are coming. Dialysis. So there are lots of these smaller opportunities which a big multi-speciality chain is opening up to. I think the challenge becomes for a player of that size and scale, does it turn the needle? I think which is the answer is clear, at least in the short term, it will not. But if you were a smaller player, right? If you were a diagnostic company, for example, right? You could, so we were talking to a Northwest company, they were into urology, right? Now they said, why won't we also do laparoscopy, right? Which is a pretty same daycare, patient turnaround in a day and a half. I think those adjacencies are very, I would say, sort of welcome and relevant. And typically they also tie in well because you also overcome the other problem of the star doctors, right? Because in some of these, I would say, single specialty chains, they're trying to come up with a corporate branding which is relevant, and the process and the outcomes are more standardized across locations. So not going to the X doctor, but you're going to more their standard sort of protocol of care, which is then delivered. So that's what.
Thanks. Shantanu, let's make it interesting. Why don't you give me the flip side on why you would turn away somebody who's trying to do too many things at the same time?
Yeah, I think the reason why that mostly true than not, Siddharth, is because sometimes you think that you can extend a core capability into another area, and you realize that it's actually extremely difficult to do so. So let me take an example. Maybe, let's say, an ophthalmology chain believes that it's really good at identifying locations, small locations, in various parts of a city, organizing the ophthalmologists, and generating revenue through good marketing efforts, and it can do it really well. and that may give them the impression that they are really good at retail health. So maybe they should do cosmetics, they should do dental, they should do other areas, because a lot of these businesses might be very catchment driven. We can identify a location, we can identify doctors, and we can do this. But more often than not, if you look around and if you look for examples, you realize that whenever such chains have tried to do so, they've actually more often than not failed in extending that capability. Because the dynamics of every practice area are actually different. The doctor supply-demand mismatch is different. The cost of procedures is different, and the unit economics of the new model are different. So I think the biggest trap is because you feel as if your core capability is extendable into an adjacency, but more often than not, you do not do enough work, you do not do enough pilots to really know if that extension is really viable or not, and can you really build a scale business or not. And I think the biggest bane for me is that when you do too many of these diversification strategies, the management team loses focus from whatever its core capability is. And if you could have done 600 units of something, at about 200 you start getting into diversification and you lose the plot because you're not focused on where you could have been really, really big and really distinctive. So I think more often than not, I think it's a distraction, and it looks good on paper, but it's very hard to execute.
No, thanks for that. I do tend to agree with you. It makes great sound bites that, we are going to be an integrated healthcare player, but it often burns up money. But Sanjay, why don't you talk about from a corporate who's actually tried a lot of this stuff?
So I'll give you a very, a very different kind of a perspective. So let's look at from the hospital standpoint or operator standpoint. I'll be interested in doing something which is core to me. Now, what is core to me? I know how to run a well-oiled system. I know how to manage the nurses, the doctors, so on and so forth. I mean, housekeeping may not be my core competence. Dentistry may not be my core competence. Radiology, oncology, while. So the treatment part, the care part, compassion part is my core, but other than that is not my core. So if there are people who are willing to seed that out, there should be people who are willing to grab that opportunity and take it as a diversification route. Now, diversification, to my mind, can be at two levels. One is the functional diversification, and I'll elaborate what I mean by functional diversification. And second is the vertical diversification, or diversification of verticals. When I say functional, now in Fortis, we mastered this art of what we call as running the operations and management of hospitals. So to my mind, this was an amazing, amazing functional diversification. I have got Gurjeet sitting here, used to run a couple of my hospitals when we were in Fortis, and he used to manage those with Elan. And the kind of struggles we used to have in managing the promoters was not easy really to handle, but we did it with with a great amount of passion and Elan. Second is IT capability. Now, if I talk about diagnostics, IT plays a very significant role. So can we leverage our expertise to create CLIMS, which is Centralized Lab Information Management System, or a HIS, and start implementing it in other hospitals? We have done this in SRL. So today, my IT department is no more a cost center to me. It's a profit center. Similarly, you can talk about call center. I mean, call center, you need a very different kind of a skill set. So, and to understand those, medical jargons is not easy. So for me, call center is again an area, home collection, all these things are functional. Now, on the vertical side, I think there are numerous possibilities. One could be, like if I talk about diagnostics, why just human testing? Can we look at food testing? Can we look at toxicology, which is heavy metal? Can we look at forensic testing? Can we look at veterinary testing? So there are multiple opportunities, multiple possibilities which are there. Similarly, on the hospital side, as I mentioned, pharmacy, dentistry, radiology, oncology, so and so forth. So I think what we need to really do is to maybe, if we are gung-ho about our capabilities, we are very certain about what kind of skill sets we have, we can use it to our advantage and create verticals who are separately, running these functions and make a good sense of, these businesses.
Good to hear that, Sanjeev. The optimism of operators and the passion is what actually makes new things happen. And so, Mr. Jalan, what has been your experience? I mean, this whole story of diversification, we can be everything.
I think a couple of perspectives. One is that you must understand that when you are diversifying, why do you diversify and to what extent you diversify? I mean, you shouldn't land up losing your focus. Why I'm saying is that this whole birthing piece, I mean, you are a happy place delivering baby, and you can't afford not to look after the neonates. Okay. Suddenly you get into children, then you get into infertility, then the same women want hysterectomy, then they want to look beautiful after the delivery. So in no time, you become a women hospital, you become a children hospital, and then you say, if I can handle women and children, the only poor people who are left are the male adults, we might as well do that. So I think somewhere you need to understand that why are you diversifying and to what extent you need to diversify. I think, and that has been the irony with a lot of people in other industries as well. Okay, I mean, they lose identity over a period of time. The second I'm just saying is, see, for example, when you diversify, let's talk about home health care. To me, it sounds very natural that you have a patient who requires post-operative care, and the only difference, and I'm not saying only as in only, is the care you provide him here is the care you need to provide at home. Okay, is that a very natural extension? To me, it sounds like a very natural extension. But the key point is, if you're going to get into that business, you understand the similarity, and that's what excites you. What you don't understand and what you rarely respect are the differences. That this is one location, 600,000 square feet, and there you're talking about everybody's home is a location. So people often underestimate the challenges with the diversification, and that in a way explains some of the failures. And I'm also saying don't diversify because it sounds good, that we need to be in this as well. If you're diversifying, and for example, if you're a leading hospital brand, and when you diversify into some business, I think it's only fair, it's only right for you to have similar ambitions in that segment. I mean, you can't be number 1 or number 2 in a particular business and number 17 in that business. Because I think then you actually haven't put your heart and soul into that. So if you diversify, you must understand and respect the difference and have targets which are as ambitious as the targets you have for your core business.
I think very well said. I mean, some of the questions you posed for the women in child space, I think are very relevant. We have an investment in Cloud9. We ask those questions to ourselves. I think also the point on, there is an element of seeing somebody else doing it and saying, hey, are we missing out something, which I think also plays into this.
The unfortunate reality, Siddharth, is the only business which excites you is the business what somebody else is doing.
No, very valid point, and that's that kind of brings this to a very on that happy note. I would say that we sort of close the discussion. But I think what comes out in this is that, in general, the operators believe extension is possible. We can do more. There's idle capacity. We have capability. And they bring that passion. They understand the nuts and bolts of the business. The interesting point is that the investors sitting out, what do they have? They are sitting and seeing many of these guys. And they're seeing the guys who are succeeding, the guys who are not succeeding, and they're seeing some patterns. And every once in a while, the investors prove the operators wrong, and every once in a while, the operators prove the investors wrong. And that's what makes all of this very interesting.